I have been battling with whether I have ADHD for a long time. And today I really want to go into what is ADHD and do I have it?
ADHD is a lifetime of being misunderstood, being told that you're too sensitive, too much. You're constantly putting on different masks. You know, it's a lifetime of shame, feeling like you don't belong. There's so many people around the world stuck in classrooms, stuck in offices, stuck in relationships that they're not happy in. They're anxious and they don't know how to get out of, compared to other people that have this awareness and they're thriving.
How do you distinguish between a safe and a stuck environment? So what advice do you have for parents who are struggling with children who have ADHD?
There's three things I would do if I had a child who had ADHD. The first thing is...
how do I deal with my partner who has ADHD? It can be really challenging at times.
Yeah, it's a brilliant question.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to A Millennial Mind, a podcast where I sit down each week with guests that discuss all things from mindset, self-growth, entrepreneurship, and extraordinary stories. Our guest today is Alex, the brilliant mind behind the ADHD Chatter podcast, known for his unfiltered and amazing conversations. Alex has built a platform that sheds light on the realities of living with ADHD, offering wisdom, humor, and a dose of relatability. From exploring late ADHD diagnosis to navigating the challenges of neurodiverse families, Alex is passionate about empowering listeners to embrace their ADHD journey. In this episode, we'll hear about Alex's personal story, from founding two huge platforms, LabBible and UniLad, to his late diagnosis, and the inspiration behind his podcast and his mission to break the stigma surrounding ADHD. We'll also explore some of the key lessons he's learned from his incredible roster of guests and dive into the strategies that have helped him thrive with a life of ADHD. But before we get into it, I have a tiny little favor to ask each of you, because my goal in 2025 is to reach 250,000 subscribers on YouTube. I know that number still sounds crazy. Trust me, it's crazy for me, but it would mean so much for me if you could just take 2 minutes out to press the like, follow, or subscribe button wherever you're watching this podcast, because it really helps me get bigger and better guests for you every single week. Thank you so much for supporting me. I'm so grateful for every single one of you who watches these podcasts every week. Let's get into this episode. Alex, hello.
Thank you so much, Shivani.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited for this podcast. I have been battling with whether I have ADHD for a long time. And I think a lot of people struggle with this problem because there's so much content out there. And today I really want to go into what is ADHD and do I have it? So before we get into that though, I would love for you to tell people why you started this journey with ADHD, why you're so passionate about sharing this message, and why you're so passionate about raising awareness around ADHD.
Yeah, it's a fantastic opening question. My inspiration, motivation for talking about ADHD as much as I do is to hopefully give people the resources to go on their journey of awareness that they might be living with ADHD earlier than I did. When I reflect back to my early years, very anxious, incredibly scared child. I had my first anxiety attack in a classroom when I was 6. I was sat at the back of the classroom, very happily daydreaming, staring out of the window. And then out of nowhere, the teacher pointed at me and said, "Alex, do you know the answer to this question?" And in that moment, all of the kids turned and looked at me. And I remember my heart rate accelerated, my face went bright red, and I ran out of the classroom. And I found someone in the corridor and I said, "Please call an ambulance, I'm having a heart attack." And of course, when the paramedic arrived, they reassured me that I wasn't having a heart attack. I was having my first anxiety attack when I was 6 years old. Anxiety, constantly feeling different. Again, back at school, I remember someone said to me, "Alex, you could be one of the cool kids if you weren't so weird." Lots of comments like that, like compounded to make me feel very misunderstood, very different, very anxious. And it was the contrast between the way I was presenting at school, which was very anxious, very quiet, very shut down, compared to the juxtaposition of how I was presenting when I was at home, when I was in a space where I felt comfortable, very safe. In my bedroom at home, I was creating businesses, starting companies at that young age. I remember my first one, I was 7 years old. I went through my parents' board games. I was looking at all the companies that manufactured all of these board games, and I spent the summer designing my own board game, making all the little pieces, designing the board, writing the instructions, and I sent my design to all of these companies.
No
and
way.
I didn't hear anything at first, but then after a couple of weeks, I got one reply, and they said, Alex, and I think they could tell how young I was because my handwriting was really like messy, but they said, unfortunately, we're not looking for any new designs, but always lean into this entrepreneurial spirit that you have. That fast forward 10, 15 years, my entire early years, that it was that contrast between how I was presenting at school in an environment where I was shut down, anxious, compared to how I was presenting when I was in a safe area. And that's why I'm so motivated to talk about ADHD, because I think there's so many people around the world stuck in classrooms, stuck in offices, stuck in relationships that they're not happy in, that they're anxious and they don't know how to get out of, compared to other people that have this awareness and they're thriving. So I'm hopeful to create this platform that enables people to maybe just ask themselves, maybe that's me, maybe I'm living with this brain that's slightly different to how society defines normal.
I think that's a really interesting point you just mentioned around having a safe environment in which you will thrive and you will focus on your strengths and you feel comfortable to explore and be creative, whilst being in a stuck environment in which you feel trapped, essentially. So how do you distinguish between a safe and a stuck environment? And how can somebody at home identify if they're in a safe or stuck environment?
That's a brilliant question. There's so many people around the world who are unaware that they're in an unsafe environment, sat in an office doing a job that they're probably not designed to do, but they're doing it because they feel like that's where they should be, because someone said something to them at home. Maybe a parent said you should be in this career, and they don't know that they've got this mask on, and they're sort of living this life that isn't a true connection to their intrinsic person. I think really being aware of how your body reacts when it's in an environment that it's not naturally supposed to be in, like listening to those knee-jerk reactions and really feeling that internal shutdown. I worked in a marketing agency about 7 years ago, and I was brought in to grow the Facebook pages of this marketing agency. And I remember I went in my first day, I remember sat in the office, and it was a busy office, bright lights, there was a table tennis table, loud music playing, a really cool place to work, I thought. But in that environment, my brain was paralyzed. It was unable to think, unable to be creative, unable to do the job that they were paying me to do. And I left within about 3 months, and I had grown their Facebook pages from 0 to about 5,000 followers. I got another job in a marketing agency, having reflected on my own experience. And in my next job, I said, can I work from home sometimes? Can I work in the canteen downstairs where it's quiet? And more importantly, can you trust me and judge me on my outcomes and not my processes? And my new boss fantastically said yes. And in the same period, I had grown their Facebook following from 0 to 8 million followers. And it's an example of how really listening to your internal knee-jerk reactions, being aware of your triggers, what is good for you and what isn't good for you, and advocating for yourself and asking for very basic accommodations, whether that's in the workplace, at home, in a relationship, because the tiniest adjustments can make huge differences to your outcomes.
There's so many questions I have on the back of that, by the way. First of all is, can I hire you? Because I want to grow my platform like that. But something that I've just reflected on in that moment is my partner works in an office, but it's Soho work. So it's really cool. It's lots of people there, lots of entrepreneurs. And I remember when I went with him for the first day, I remember we moved in and we both went there for the first day. In my office job, in my corporate role, I used to leave early if I could, by the way, even if it was by 15 minutes or 10 minutes or an hour, and I would then come and work from home. It wasn't that I would just leave early. But I remember on the first day we went to the office, I left at 3 and I had to come home. And he goes to the office every single day and he absolutely loves it. And I've always wondered why I can't work in an office. But just hearing your story right now has made me feel so heard and seen, because I don't thrive in that environment. If someone's on a call next to me, I feel agitated. I feel stressed out. I feel like I can't focus. But also in an office, I feel like I have to present myself in a nice way, because if I'm not presented in a nice way, I feel like a slob. And if I feel like a slob, then I can't focus on my work, because I'm more concentrated on, does everybody else think I'm a slob? But I haven't had that realization apart from in this moment just now when you were talking about that. And I think that's what I love so much about your podcast, is that so much of what you said validates me. And I want to go back to the first question about feeling safe in an environment. When was the first time you realized what your safe environment was? Because I've just had this moment here realizing that, oh, that's why I can't work in an office. So much of what I know now is based on reflection. So I'll look back in my life and think, that was the moment that changed that for me. What was the moment that changed that for you? And how can we encourage people to find that moment right now?
I think it's really interesting because there was one thing that I started doing that enabled me to become more aware of what was my safe environments and what were environments where I was, as you just mentioned, being overstimulated, where there's just too many noises going on and you can't focus because you're distracted, you've got overstimulation, overwhelm. And the thing I did that enabled me to become more aware was I started very simple self-awareness exercises. And I remember I was about 12 or 13 years old when I started doing these. So I went about my life. I went into many different situations as I could. At that age, it was a classroom,
right,
or it was at home, or social situations. And I remember sitting at the end of my bed and being intrinsically honest with myself in that moment at the end of every day, or as often as I could. And I really asked myself, what happened today that made me happy? What happened today that made me sad?
right.
What did I do today that I found challenging? What did I do today that I found easy? And I started to do this very basic self-awareness exercise as often as I could. It can take minutes. It doesn't take long. But I realized when I intentionally started to work on my self-awareness, I built up this arsenal of internal awareness that enabled me to recognize what situations were good and what situations were bad for me. And as soon as I started to do that, that's when the needle changed and I was making better decisions and placing myself in environments that enabled my mind to be active and creative and be a good problem solver and to join the dots and to thrive and to make just less decisions where I was putting myself in situations where it was noisy, bright, overstimulating that caused me to shut down.
Wow. I love how reflective you were as a kid. See, it seems like you're a bit of a genius. At 6, you're creating board games. At 11, you're asking these deep questions, which only I ask myself now. But one thing that I wanted to share with you is I think so often we don't know what our strengths are. And I actually have a journal, and those 3 questions are in my reflection section. You know, what did I do well today? What did I enjoy? What can be better? Right? Really understanding those 3 questions. And I think so often if we do that, we start to focus on our strengths instead of thinking about every day is the same and focusing on those negative things that really impact us. Now, I really want to talk about ADHD with you because you've interviewed over 150 people around ADHD, or is it more now? It's probably more now, right?
Yeah, probably a bit more now.
Probably a bit more now.
Overwhelming.
But I'd really like to just start with the basics. What is ADHD? And how do I know that I have it?
It's a brilliant question, such a foundational question. So when I got my diagnosis, I Googled, what is ADHD? And it came up and it said ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder characterized by traits of impulsivity, forgetfulness, and disorganization. And I thought, okay, that sounds like what I thought it was.
Okay.
I think that's what most people think it is. But as I reflected on my own life and spoke to hundreds of people on my podcast and thousands of people in the community, I realized that ADHD is so much more than that. ADHD is a lifetime of being misunderstood and being told that you're too sensitive or you're too much, not understanding why you flare up so much in the face of rejection, not recognizing that you're constantly putting on different masks and changing your entire personality. depending on who you're standing in front of at any given moment. It's not understanding why you could never remember to take your reusable shopping bags to the supermarket. You know, it's a lifetime of shame and feeling like you don't belong. And then you get this diagnosis, or you become aware that you might have ADHD, and you might have this brain that is different to what you've been taught normal is. And it's a process of grief, validation, self-reflection, and you can begin to find your tribe, find your community, peel back these layers and understand what really is you, and what's a coping mechanism. And you finally realize after all these years that you are enough, and you have always been enough. You're not broken, you're just a bit different, and that everything in your past finally makes sense. You look back through an entire life through this new lens of ADHD, and you can reflect on so many situations, you know, why you overshare at social gatherings and then spend weeks unable to sleep because you're so anxious about what you said, and you now think that everyone hates you at that party, including your best friends. Perhaps finding it easy to make friends, but hard to maintain them. It's being so anxious when someone replies to a text message with just a thumbs up emoji, or just okay. If your boss asks you for a quick chat without any context, it's this anxiety. You genuinely catastrophize, and you think your whole world's going to end. People with ADHD are exposed to 20,000 more negative criticisms throughout their entire life because they are intrinsically different. Lots of micro corrections. Stop fidgeting. Stop doing that. Stop being naughty. And they compound over a childhood, over a lifetime, to create an adult that's so primed to react defensively in the face of criticism and rejection. But when you get the awareness piece and you understand that, you can be so much kinder to yourself and remove a lot of the shame and guilt, because a lot of your behavior, it wasn't your fault. It was all because you are neurodivergent, living in a neurotypical world. And when you get that awareness piece, then you can begin to grieve the life that could have been, that should have been, had you known earlier. But the earlier people can find out that they're not broken, just different, and that they have always been enough, then that's when the true journey of self-discovery begins.
Wow, I can resonate with so much of what you're saying. And I really want to ask you this question, because what's frustrating at the moment is we're seeing a lot of people who are unqualified talking about ADHD. And the great thing about the internet is so many of us can share our experiences. But sometimes the downside of that is people share experiences and label it to something that they haven't researched. So, for example, if I'm a forgetful person, and that's one of the things that I think means that I have ADHD, I'll say I have ADHD because I'm always forgetful. And so right now what we're seeing is that there's hundreds and thousands of accounts talking about ADHD, and a lot of them are saying different things. So how would I know that I have ADHD?
It's very difficult. I mean, there's a lot of misinformation on social media. Tons of people are talking about it, like you said. The truth is, and it's very difficult to distinguish between someone who just has traits that you would associate with ADHD against someone who actually has ADHD. Because the reality is everyone does have traits of ADHD. Everyone does forget things occasionally. Everyone does zone out of conversations occasionally. Everyone does struggle with organization occasionally. These are human traits. Everyone responds badly to criticism. These aren't uniquely characterized as ADHD. The difference, I think, is because ADHD, when a neurotypical person experiences these traits, it'll be like little waves, little ups and downs. It won't be too extreme. Whereas an ADHD person who would actually reach a criteria to get a diagnosis if they went to a psychologist, the highs in life would be monumental, like the peak, the summit of Everest. And the lows would be the lowest point on earth. It's the extreme swings between the good and the bad, and the continuousness of those swings. It really winds me up. It irritates me when I hear people say everyone has ADHD, because the truth is there are serious comorbidities with people that actually have those swings to the extreme enough that would enable them to get the diagnosis of ADHD. If you have ADHD, you're 4 times more likely to take your own life. That's the reality of ADHD.
Wow.
Everyone isn't 4 times more likely to take their own life. Everyone isn't 5 times more likely to get severe depression to the point where you are unable to sleep. Everyone isn't 7 times more likely to leave their job within 3 months because they're so anxious because they feel different. The reality of actual ADHD is significant, and it differentiates from the normal population in such an extreme way. So the phrase everyone has ADHD these days just isn't true.
I love that you explained that. That was going to be my next question for you, because I think that phrase can really take away from the people who are really suffering. And I really like the way that you explain that there's a difference between having ADHD traits and having ADHD, because a lot of these traits are just human traits, and so many of us experience them. There's probably a lot of people that are sitting here watching or listening to this podcast thinking, I'm resonating with everything that you're saying, but there is a huge wait list on the NHS. There's even a bigger wait list on private. Why do you think that the wait list has gone up so much in the last few years?
Really simple short answer is twofold. Number one, awareness has spiked massively in the last 5 years. Loads of people are talking about it. So that's the first factor. The second factor is an underfunded NHS.
Yeah.
And that's a very nuanced, in-depth conversation to go on in there. Probably not for this. It's a very boring conversation, but really it's an increase in demand, and the ability to meet that demand just isn't there. So we're seeing huge amounts of people coming forward, desperate to seek answers, and the ability to resource those people just isn't there.
And do you think a diagnosis does give you answers? Because just from my own experience, I have a therapist, and she said to me, Shivani, I think that you do have ADHD. And I said, okay. And she said, I think you should get tested. And the question I asked her was, but why? Because I don't feel that it is in that, like I'm in that bracket of it's ruining my life and I can't cope with that medication. Or getting a diagnosis for me was, I almost don't maybe want to accept it, if that makes sense. And so not knowing means that I don't have it really, and it's just an assumption, and I don't need to know about it. So that was my reason for not getting a diagnosis. But from your podcast and from the amount of people you speak to, why do some people not bother getting a diagnosis even if they think that they do have ADHD?
You can seek the validation and you can get the benefits of a diagnosis without getting the diagnosis.
Okay.
I mean, really, if you get the diagnosis, you get the stamp from a psychologist, and then you can get medication.
Yeah.
But if you feel like you don't need medication and really you just want some understanding, you can go a long way to sort of seeking those answers yourself, putting steps in place to go easier on yourself and to make your life a little bit easier without the official medical stamp. We can all take steps today to make our life a little bit better. My number one rule with any ADHD management is never worry alone. Never try to do this on your own. If you have a friendship group, a family member, a community on social media, or at work, share your feelings, share your journey with these people, ask for feedback. Once you have an understanding that you're not broken and that you're just a bit different, then you can put little systems in place to improve your happiness. So many people are trying to force themselves into this sort of neurotypical world. They're putting on this mask every day, they're going to work, and they're coming home burnt out and absolutely exhausted because they've spent so much energy pretending to be someone that they're not. The moment I realized how much I was masking when I became aware of ADHD was monumental. I always use this example of eye contact. My whole career, I was forcing eye contact, and I realize now that you can either have my undivided attention or you can have my perfect eye contact, but you can't have both.
Wow.
And I realized just one example of how much I was putting energy into this image of myself. And because of that, I was unable to think, unable to pay attention to the conversation that was in front of me. So when it was my turn to speak, I didn't know what to say because I was putting so much energy into maintaining this appearance that I thought was professional. And now I'm a lot more unashamedly myself. But there's lots of things people can do once they have an awareness that they might have ADHD. I think the key one is, as I said, don't worry alone. The second one is work on the self-awareness exercises I mentioned earlier. Because people with ADHD, we have this incredible perception of time, from my experience and the people we've spoken to. We're either in the now or we're in the not now. Things, objects, people will float past us. Some of them will come into our now. That could be a new job, a new relationship, a new hobby. And because we're quite impulsive, when this new thing comes into our now, we jump on it. We can go all into this new thing. We can hyper-focus on this new hobby. We can buy the domain.
Right.
We can buy all the equipment. We can fall in love super quickly. This new person that comes into our life, we can hyper-focus on them. We can even propose. I've spoken to people who have literally proposed within a couple of weeks. This person has become their, or a new job comes into their now, and they get so passionate about it. They apply, but when these things don't align with the results of our self-awareness exercises, if this new job, this new person, this new hobby isn't connected to our intrinsic motivations and passions, after the honeymoon period has passed, you'll quit.
Yeah.
You'll abandon that domain. It'll go into that graveyard of domains that we all have. You'll leave the relationship.
Right.
You'll quit that job. So it's so important, I think, with ADHD management, is to really work on those self-awareness exercises I mentioned earlier, to build up this arsenal of self-awareness that will genuinely give you an edge in any area of your life. And in particular, when something, new job, new relationship, new hobby, comes into your now, you can then cross-reference it with your database of self-awareness exercises and then understand if that thing is a good fit or not, and therefore make better choices and say yes to things that have a higher chance of you sustaining. Because I genuinely believe that when someone with ADHD finds something, a hobby, a new business that is connected to their intrinsic motivations, they will become world-beating at it, world-class, and they will go on and do fantastic things with whatever that thing is.
I really love that you've just said that. Again, I have so many questions going on in my head. I'm like, which one do I ask you first? But the first thing I really want to talk about is, you mentioned earlier that people who have ADHD find it hard to take constructive feedback. So your first point around ask people for feedback, how does somebody overcome that fear when they're asking people for feedback around if they have ADHD or that self-awareness piece, or talking to their friends? Because, you know, how you said in school, someone said to you, you know, Alex, you'd be so much cooler if you were normal. I'm sure a lot of people who are watching this are probably thinking, I would love to ask for feedback, but what if someone turns around to me and says, yeah, you are just really weird, or you are a bit too much, or yeah, you definitely have ADHD? Because depending on who you speak to, someone might say, yeah, I think you might have ADHD, or someone might say, yeah, that person has that and you have ADHD. And that's happened to me. And I felt really uncomfortable in that moment because they were comparing me to somebody who I didn't perhaps respect or value. And so when they said that, I thought, oh God, now you think I'm a bad person. And so how do they overcome that step?
I think it's so important when you are anticipating feedback that you are prepared with how you're going to react. The first step is to have this awareness that you might get triggered.
Okay.
As I mentioned earlier, lots of people, particularly in the ADHD community, in our childhood, we have been exposed to so many more negative criticism. So we are terrified of encountering one as an adult. That's why so many of us struggle to put boundaries in place. We won't go for that promotion. We'll stay in a relationship longer than we should have done because we're terrified to confront the uncomfortable situation.
Okay.
But what we can do to get better is to recognize that when that trigger happens and those feelings come, those intense feelings, whether that's internalized sadness or rage, is to really acknowledge them and to validate them and to remind yourself that they're not your fault. You haven't done anything wrong. You're not responding rationally to the person in front of you today. You're responding because what that person in front of you today has done has snapped your nervous system back to those 20,000 negative criticisms that you had years ago.
Right.
And once you have that awareness, you can then put systems in place to make sure that your response to the criticisms are rational to the person stood in front of you today. And that's putting a break and a pause between the stimulus, i.e. the person giving you constructive feedback today,
Right.
and your response.
So what if I am with somebody who I want to now give constructive feedback to, but they constantly shout at me and they slap me across the face? And then they say, well, Shivani, it wasn't my fault. It's because I have ADHD and I can't regulate my emotions and I have rage. So can you forgive me?
ADHD is never an excuse for there's a whole nother conversation here.
And sorry, well, the reason why I asked you that question is I'm sure when you're listening to us talking about this, and I think it's really important to give yourself that compassion, but I think there are a lot of people who are stuck in relationships with people who treat them really badly. And perhaps when they listen to this podcast, they're thinking, oh, well, maybe I just treat you badly because I have ADHD and you should understand me better. And then they gaslight them even further. So I'm asking it from kind of that angle to avoid that situation from happening.
So if there's a person who's being treated badly and that person is saying, sorry, I have ADHD, that's why I...
Yeah, rage and I react like this and I can't take constructive feedback. So when you tell me that you didn't like what I was wearing, or you just said that, oh, maybe you should wear a warmer jacket instead of a colder one, I went mental at you. And that's because, I have ADHD and I can't regulate myself.
Yeah, I mean, no one should use ADHD as an excuse. They have to have a willingness and acknowledgement that they're being triggered in situations like that. And they have to have an emotional maturity to acknowledge that behavior is there and a willingness to work on it.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you can't just go through life lashing out at people.
Right.
And saying nasty things and, God forbid, slapping someone. That's not an excuse. ADHD is never a get out of jail free card. And if you are in a relationship with someone like that, run.
Yeah, leave.
But opening the conversation to them, give them a book, a link to a podcast or a soundbite, something that might enable them to start their journey to recognize that there is a reason for that behavior.
Right.
And if they're willing to listen and to work on that, then that's a good sign.
Yeah.
If they just shut it down, maybe try again. If they continue to shut it down, it might not be right for you to stay in that situation.
I think what you've mentioned there, which is really interesting, is that somebody who listens to this podcast and says, oh, I think I have ADHD, they're going to be a bit more open-minded and more self-aware about themselves because they're listening to this, they're absorbing it and thinking, I have this. It's not going to be a narcissist who's going to be like, I'm not like that and it's your fault that I'm like that, because they're not going to think that they have anything. They're not going to think that, not it's that their fault, I'm trying to reword that, but they're not going to think that it's anything to do with them. They're going to just think that it's about you. But one of the questions that I asked my Instagram audience was, what do you want me to ask this ADHD expert? And one of the things that they said was, how do I deal with my partner who has ADHD? Because it can be really challenging at times. I really love them. I know that their ADHD doesn't, define them, but I am finding it difficult to be with them because they do experience rage. They are always forgetful, so the load is always on me. They're scatty a lot of the time and disorganized, so it means that I have to take on more responsibility. And their mood changes all the time, so I'm having to deal with these mood changes. And I'm sure another long list of things that people struggle with. But how do people in a relationship manage that?
Approaching everything, approaching your partner's behavior and reciprocating it both ways. Approach as often as you can everything with curiosity and not judgment, and accept that you are both human and it is okay to get really frustrated at each other at sometimes, particularly if your partner is not pulling their weight, not doing the dishes, not cleaning up, putting so much workload on you. That's not fair. And it's okay in those moments to have an argument. Like there's nothing wrong with that. I think what's really important in any relationship is to intentionally budget time as often as you can, like once a week or once a month, to sit down during a time when both of you are regulated, not triggered, not angry at each other. And this can change every month, every day, whenever you do it, because it's unpredictable when you're both going to be in a good mood. And as a couple, really reflect on the time period that's just passed.
Yeah.
And say, look, we rowed on Tuesday night because I asked you to clean that bedroom and you forgot.
Right.
Or you didn't do the dishes on Wednesday night. And remember, we rowed. And really together sit down as a couple, and you have to be honest.
Yeah.
You really have to be honest. You have to have the willingness, the emotional maturity, and the motivation to want the relationship to work. That's the most important thing. Because the second one of you genuinely doesn't want the relationship to work anymore, you might as well close the door in that moment. But if there's a willingness and a genuine desire to water the relationship and to continue the love, sit down as often as you can when you're both regulated, when you're both calm, and talk about the period that's just passed. What happened? What was good? What happened that was bad? Say sorry.
Yes.
Hug.
Yes.
What can we do? Become aware of each other's triggers. You will both have triggers. You know, this rejection sensitivity isn't an exclusive ADHD thing. There will be moments where somebody says a fleeting comment and the other partner has taken it as a criticism or a rejection or a perceived rejection or criticism. And the partner has shut down or lashed out and said something really, really nasty.
Right.
And again, they've been snapped back to something that happened in their childhood maybe, and become aware of each other's triggers.
I did this exercise with my partner, and one thing I said to him was, when I react in a certain way, I'm really triggered by an insecurity. And I said, I need you to ask me in that moment, what's triggered you? So we actually haven't argued in a really long time, because I think that we have, we still have disagreements, but nothing gets completely out of hand anymore, because I will now say to him, what you've just said has really triggered me. But that didn't happen immediately. Sometimes I would still get really annoyed and he would say, okay, what's upset you about what I've said? And I'm like, what do you mean what's upset me? How do you not understand? And he would be like, something's really upset you. So what is it? Because I'm not trying to upset you. So that was something that he started saying to me. And it really helped me to realize, like, we're not enemies. But the other thing that I learned to do was just to say, I'm really triggered by this. I feel really insecure by this. I feel like you're making me sound like an idiot. And he would say, I'm not. And I would say, this is how it makes me feel. And just being honest with how you feel in that moment, because so often when we shout, we're just masking how we're actually feeling, which is insecure, jealous, upset, not pretty enough, not good enough, a loser, whatever it is. But I created a safe space with him when we reflected on an argument and said, it's okay to say things in that moment. And also another thing I learned is, if I've made a mistake, it doesn't mean I'm the worst partner in the world, right? So often if I would do something wrong, I would say, okay, I'm sorry, but I didn't mean it, because by admitting that saying I'm so sorry would mean that I did something wrong. And if I admit that I did something wrong, then I'm a horrible person. And I think so often we're so scared to say sorry because we've attached being the world's worst person by admitting a flaw, and we're not perfect. And I think that was one of the things that I found really, really difficult at the start of my relationship. But by having those honest reflections when we've had an argument has really, really helped me. What's another tool you can give to people who perhaps are seeing traits of ADHD within their children and they're not sure how to manage it because they've never experienced it themselves? You know, you said growing up, you were always told, don't do that, or don't be naughty, or don't say things like that. And I got my fair share of that a lot. But as a parent, you don't want to give your child that same experience, but at the same time, you don't want them to be naughty. So what advice do you have for parents who are struggling with children who have ADHD?
Yeah, it's a brilliant question. And really, there's three things I would do if I had a child who had ADHD. The first thing is to let them know that they are enough. Continuously, or as often as you can, remind them that they are enough. I spoke at a school, and one of the parents I spoke to said, and I love this, she gave her son a teddy bear and it said, always enough on the teddy, embroidered on there. And the point was to let the child know that they are always enough. But the secondary point was that the child could come to the parent and talk about anything. Nothing was too much to talk about. Whatever problem, whatever issue the child wanted to discuss, nothing was too much. And it was that constant reassurance to the child that there was this safe space and this channel of communication. Because I think a lot of children, they don't want to ask for support, bring up issues because they feel overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And because the topic is too much. Allow the child to feel safe and able to open up about anything, for starters. I think secondly, neurodivergent children respond so much better to choices rather than demands.
Yes.
It's how many times have I witnessed a child be told what to do and shut down and do something else because they just in that moment get dysregulated, overwhelmed by the demand. Give them an option. So rather than we're eating dinner at 7 o'clock, would you like to eat at 7 or 7:15? It's a very minor thing, but if you put the choice with them, suddenly they're a lot happier to get involved. And I think the reality is, of course, sometimes we're going to have to correct behavior. You can't just let children do whatever they want all the time. It would be chaos.
Yeah.
But I think it's such a good, where appropriate, to try and correct behavior by making the child aware of the consequences of their actions on others. And there's a drastic example I use, but say you're in a restaurant and your child is misbehaving and throwing food around.
Right.
Rather than saying, stop doing that, you could say, if you keep throwing that food around, you're going to get my dress dirty.
Well, the child say, I don't care. I want to get it dirty.
Well, this dress is very expensive.
Oh, I don't care. Is it more expensive than this car? We're just role playing here now. Just suddenly switched into role play.
Yeah. I mean, there's limitations.
Right.
You'll run out of things. You know, the child does have to also be taught boundaries from a young age, and some behaviours will be unacceptable and do need to be shut down.
Right.
But I think the first port of call is to always make the child aware of the consequences of their actions first. They respond so much better to rationale rather than demands. That's the point. Like, frame it in, your actions have consequences and are going to be negative to either yourself or someone else. Because that's rationale, that's an understanding, that's framing that's giving them reason.
Would a rationale be to say, if you keep doing that, we're going to have to go home? Or is that mean?
Maybe that would be the third or the fourth.
Yeah, the last one after the ones that we've just gone through, by the way, not immediately. Oh, if you do that one more time, I'm going home. No, but I think that question of, please don't do that, it's upsetting me. Is that another one that we could say?
Absolutely.
Because I'm always unsure of what to say now. Because I also don't want to, not that I have children, but when I do, I'm going to be so confused because I also don't want to make them feel bad and think that they're always upsetting me, But I have heard some parents say, mommy doesn't like that and that really upsets me. So please stop doing that. And sometimes the child's just like, I don't care. But it's an interesting one. I think the demands v the questions is really powerful. And I think so often, when we're talking about ADHD in kids, I also just realised we're not talking about a 3-year-old that's going to be throwing spaghetti. So perhaps wasn't that best example. It's probably going to be a 7 or 8-year-old who perhaps doesn't want to go home if they're enjoying time with their friends. But the point you made around don't do this, don't do that, I think is really powerful because I had never realised, even now at home, I shake my leg all the time. And Nikhil's like, there's an earthquake. And I'm like, I'm in the middle of editing. Don't tell me that. I know. My friends will put their hand on my knee and it makes me so angry sometimes. Sometimes I just feel the rage inside. I'm like, don't put your hand on my knee. I need to do this. Or I bite my nails a lot, or I just bite my skin. And people are like, stop doing that. And all of these microaggressions, you don't even realize that people are doing them to you, but they build up. So when you do react, then people are like, you're a lunatic. And then you also feel like you're a lunatic. So I think that's a really helpful thing to share, that don't demand things of people, maybe ask them questions to see how you can get around it.
I think what's also really important here is to recognize that we're human and parents will not always be able to follow those
Yes.
instructions and that advice in the moment. We're all human. We all have temper, and sometimes you will lose it.
Right.
And to not beat yourself up when that happens, there's no shame in getting frustrated at your child when he is or she is throwing spaghetti bolognese all over your new carpet.
Yeah.
Sometimes you will just boil over.
Right.
And it's okay. And it's okay. But the key thing in that situation is to once you have calmed down, and this could be the next day, have a conversation with the child and to explain what happened, why mummy, daddy got triggered, why that behavior was bad. The rationale doesn't always have to be in the moment. Sometimes in the moment you will lose your temper.
Right.
We live in the real world. We're all human. I think it's so important to come back to that experience and to have an honest, grown-up conversation with the child and to say, this is what happened. This is why I reacted like that.
Yeah.
Again, the rationale doesn't always have to be in the moment.
You've talked a lot about guilt and shame in this podcast. And whilst I think I can learn to manage my guilt sometimes, I think something that I just can't resonate with is that you shouldn't feel shame when you do something wrong. For some reason, I feel that I should feel shame because if I don't, then I'm not sorry. What's the links between ADHD and shame?
So many people with ADHD have spent so many years pretending to be someone that they're not, adjusting their entire personality to be more palatable for whoever they're with, shape-shifting themselves to fit in, feeling misunderstood. And when someone highlights that insecurity, it can snap you into this dysregulated state. It's almost like someone's seen through the mask and the camouflage isn't as strong as you thought. The shame then can bubble up. I've spoken to so many people who have shared this experience with me. It's like all of their hard work has gone to waste. You spent so much energy throughout the day pretending that sometimes you come home from work and you've got nothing left. All you can do is lie on the sofa and doom scroll social media. You're completely frazzled. It's like you've got 10 highly caffeinated squirrels barreling around in your head. You've got so many things to do. You need to put the bins out. You need to reply to that email. You need to text your friend back. You need to do all of those things, but the effort and the thought of trying to prioritize all of those things in some kind of order creates an overwhelm that physically paralyzes you in that moment, and you are unable to do anything other than lie on the sofa and scroll social media to escape the stress. And the shame that comes with that as an optic, you thinking, what does this look like in front of my children?
Right.
In front of my partner, in front of my parents, if you live at home, for example. That's why it's so important, going back to that relationship question, and even with children, is to communicate this process with your nearest and dearest. So when you are in those moments, they understand.
Right.
Because that's when real arguments, massive, impulsive, almost breakups, divorces can happen when you're in that state and your partner says that one thing like, stop being lazy, just do the dishes.
Yeah.
But you haven't communicated as a partner why you're in that paralyzed state in that moment, because you could have gone through a million things at work.
Right.
Like you could have been in 2 meetings, you could have had a confrontation at work, you could have had a criticism on a bit of work you submitted, and you've got all of that going on in your head. And in that moment, your partner said a little thing like, oh, please, can you help me do the dishes? And it's tipped you over the edge, and you've lashed out or you've started crying. And it's the shame that comes with all of this. And again, it all compounds and goes back to those 20,000 negative messages, all of that stuff that happened in that day that has caused you to be in that paralyzed state on the sofa. It's all because of that emotional dysregulation that you've had to deal with throughout the day. And understanding that the emotional dysregulation is what's behind so much of the struggles with ADHD. It's so important to communicate that with your partner. And if you can't, because sometimes you're so dysregulated that you can't even communicate, have a safe word or a signal. Come through the door and tap your partner on the shoulder. I need 15 minutes. I'm going to go upstairs. It's not personal. I've had a really bad day.
Right.
I'll be back in 15 minutes, regulated, and I'll help you do the dishes.
Right.
You know, it's a simple thing. It all comes back to that communication, whether that's with your partner, family, children, colleagues, co-work, boss, whoever. It's so important to communicate so you're all on the same page.
I had a business idea once. I think you're going to like this, and I'm sure someone, please make this business idea. But sometimes I feel like I can't communicate how I feel, and so I wanted to make different T-shirts with different emotions on them. Like, I'm moody today. I am overly stimulated right now. Don't talk to me right now, because sometimes I can't say those things. But my partner convinced me it was a bad idea, and I didn't have any desire to start a whole clothing line, so I didn't do it. But that was one of the things that I said I wanted to do. Thank you. I thought it was a great idea. I said, on the days where you can't communicate how you feel, sometimes you just need a slogan on a T-shirt so somebody knows, so that they give you a bit more compassion and empathy. But clearly it wasn't going to work with him, so I got rid of that idea. Something that you said that I really want to explore a little bit deeper is that so many people are masking. Now, when you're saying that, I don't think I can resonate. But when you're saying when you come back from an event and you come home and you need to just be silent and mindlessly scrolling social media, I can really resonate. So how do I know if I'm masking or not?
Masking is inherently a very human thing.
Okay.
We all get up in the morning and have a shower, get ready, do our hair. You put on a version that's the best of yourself before you leave the front door. That's a human survival instinct. We want to put our best foot forward to achieve the best result possible in terms of staying alive.
Mm-hmm.
I think people with ADHD do it so much more than neurotypicals because of, again, going back to those our early year experiences, we've been taught, we have this internal monologue that we're not enough, or too much, or that we're too sensitive. So we either put on a front or we hold back our natural hyperactivity, and that can turn into internal anxiety. I think studying your knee-jerk reactions is a fundamental tool to enable you to be more aware of when you are masking and when you're not, because your subconscious, the thing that controls your knee-jerk reactions, that will be more connected to your intrinsic personality, your intrinsic motivations, your true self, as opposed to the front, the sort of artificial person that you're putting on. So when you hear someone say a comment, you're going to react intrinsically inside you before your masked version reacts. And this is difficult to do. It takes time, but really being aware of those immediate knee-jerk reactions. And again, at the end of the day, really trying to journal on those and becoming aware of what they are, because those will be your true self, your true internal self. That's what's responding immediately. That's often a fraction of a second behind the masked response, which might be completely different.
Right.
But it's recognizing there's a differentiation between the knee-jerk reaction and your masked reaction, and recognizing the ability to separate those two and focusing on the first one and spending time intentionally journaling on the knee-jerk reaction. So again, over time, you should be able to build up this awareness of what your true self is.
Right.
And then you can quite easily spot when you're not being true to that.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. We talked a lot about how you manage ADHD in your relationships, but one relationship that I don't think is talked about enough is friendships. And I want to talk about it from both sides here. If you're someone who perhaps has ADHD and you have a friend who speaks slowly, thinks before she talks, really listens, doesn't share any experiences with you, you can feel that she's closed. You can feel she doesn't say anything to me. She doesn't, share anything, so I'm going to stop sharing with her. And, she just listens and she's so slow to talk to and everything she does is so slow and it's driving me mad. How do you deal with that? Not speaking from experience, by the way.
There's nothing more painful than a slow talker or a slow walker.
Nothing more painful.
But that's, it's very unique. Of course I can be friends with someone who talks slowly. Of course I can be patient.
Right.
Sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I finish someone's sentence before they do. I can often tell who the killer is in a horror film in the first 5 minutes before anyone else. There's this pattern recognition through time, I think it's why so many people with ADHD are such a great judge of character, because you pick up on patterns in behaviors. So when you come across someone who's a nasty person, you can spot the little micro movements and mannerisms that give that away
Right.
before other people do. But look, if you've got a friend who's a slow talker, then that's everyone is different. Some people will be able to manage that. Some people won't. I think it's have fun with it. Right. Humor is such a great thing. As long as you're not rude. Again, it's going back to the ADHD is never an excuse. Some people are just not compatible together, and that's okay. ADHD people aren't exclusively going to be friends with ADHD people. That's not the case at all. But at the same time, it is very true for me that if someone who is a slow talker, I can't pretend it isn't very annoying. But at the same time, I have compassion and empathy enough to not show that.
Okay.
Have a conversation with someone, allow them to speak in whichever way they want to. We're all human. It's having an understanding of yourself, but also an awareness that we're all different, and we all have to respect each other and recognize that there is room for all types of neurotypes in a conversation.
I want to go to the other side now and talk about, I have a friend who's just been diagnosed with ADHD. 1, she doesn't stop talking about it. 2, she's constantly on her phone every time we meet. 3, I can't have a conversation with her because she's jumping from one topic to another. And 4, every time I talk to her and tell her about my boyfriend problems, she jumps in and tells me about hers. And I've researched into ADHD. I know these are all traits, and I know she doesn't mean it, but I am too scared to have a conversation with her because I feel like she's going to take it badly. And also I'm a bit scared of what she's going to tell me about myself because I don't take to feedback very well. Challenging one, that one, wasn't it?
the taking when you hear a conversation and you reply with a similar story, it can often look like the person's trying to make it all about them. That's the optics that gives. But from my experience, it's almost that person is just trying to show you that they understand by sharing a similar story.
Yeah.
Very relatable. Situations like this aren't easy. I would recommend actually having a conversation, but a compliment sandwich.
Yes.
Is a brilliant idea. Weave it in. Don't make the criticism the focal point, because the opposite of this horrible thing called rejection sensitive dysphoria is a euphoric response to praise. If you sandwich in, strategically place the criticism, which is the key point of your key objective, but you sandwich it between 2 compliments, then it can go a long way to disarming the effect of that criticism, because you've almost balanced it out, because you've got a huge euphoric moment based off your compliment, criticism in the middle, and then compliment on the other side. So it will go some way to balance it out.
Yeah.
But it's never easy. The fact that again, humor is a great tool. You could even, as long as it's not gaslighting, bullying, whatever, you can make a joke about it. I know you're going to react badly to this, but I do need to say something, and then put your point across, and they can come back, and you can, maybe one of you will get triggered. That's okay. Again, it comes back to coming back to after the regulations returned, after some time has passed, and laughing about it together. But the points have been made, so you will have got your point across, and you've maintained the friendship by not saying something that is totally catastrophic in the moment of dysregulation.
I had a friend, and every time we met, she'd constantly be on her phone. And it was really annoying me. And I just thought, this is so rude. You're not present in this conversation. It feels like you're not listening. It feels like you don't care. And I reflected on it, and I thought, how on earth am I going to tell her this? Because I'm sometimes on my phone. It's not like I'm never on my phone. If something crops up, I am. And I really reflected, and I thought, why does this annoy me so much? And I think it's because I don't see her that often. So that when I do, I really want to be present in that moment with her. And the way that I approached the conversation was framing it with the care that I have for her. And I think so often in arguments, we never approach the conversation with the care that we have for that person and why that person is important to us. And if we do it that way, the other person isn't going to take it badly because you're coming from a place of love rather than a place of criticism, which is you do this. Because if someone says to you, you do this, the ultimate defense tool is to be like, but you do it sometimes too. And then you think, yeah, but you do it more. Yeah, but you do it on this occasion. And there's no learning there. And there's also no care there for each other. So that's something that's really helped me, is approaching a conversation with care has really helped me to not turn those into like a huge argument. What are some of the things that you still struggle with managing ADHD?
There's a couple of things that for me are my Achilles heel. Again, it's always been this horrible thing called RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria. It's this visceral, physiological, instant response to a perceived or real criticism. I can be having the most perfect day, and someone says the tiniest thing, and it's like they've stuck a dagger in my heart and twisted it. And instant, visceral, physiological, intense sadness. And I've spoken to the leading experts on this topic, and it has to start with awareness, because there isn't really, in the short term, a solution to it other than awareness and to get your hell self out of the situation before you say something nasty. Like, put time between the event and your response. That has to be the case, because far often than not, you'll say something in response to the trigger that the next day, after you've regulated and calmed down, you're just filled with guilt and shame about, because you didn't mean it.
Yeah.
This is really the thing that still holds me back. You know, I was on the train last week to go and record a podcast, so happy, excited, and someone sent me an email in response to an email I had sent them with just thanks. And it's so ridiculous. You know, I'm 36, running this podcast, and someone didn't sign off an email with 2 emojis, and it triggered me. And I shut down on the train. Luckily, there was enough time between that event and me starting an interview where I had to be on form and happy and communicative, for me to regulate and to recognize. But, you know, it's that thing that gets me all the time. It's that, and it's so unpredictable when it might happen. But to become aware of it and to know that when it does happen, it's not your fault, and to, if you can, put a breaker between the trigger and your response is so important. And the main thing that really is my biggest Achilles heel is this thing called object permanence. And it's this idea to me that if something's not in my immediate now, it's not right in front of me, and it's not really important to me, it ceases to exist. I have to keep things visual. I have this massive whiteboard on my desk. And whenever something comes into my life that's important, like a meeting, a podcast, appointment, a train journey, I immediately write it down on my big whiteboard. I keep it visual, keep it bright, keep it in front of me. Because as soon as it's not in front of me, I forget that it exists. And it applies to so many things. Replying to friends, maintaining friendships, maintaining jobs, remembering meetings. If that reminder to text my friend back isn't on a post-it note on my fridge, I'll forget to do it, and 2 weeks will go past, and then I won't reply to that text message, and then I'll be filled with shame, anxiety. I won't reply, and that'll be another friendship that has just drifted off and come to an end because I just forgot to reply to them because it wasn't immediately in front of me. This object permanence concept is fascinating to me, and I think it is the thing that has enabled me to let so many things drift out of my life that actually should have stayed in it. But on the flip side, it's also the thing that has enabled me to hyper-focus on so many positive things in my life. Because what does always stay in my front and center, is what is intrinsically important to me. And in the past, that was my social media brands, my relationship, now my podcast. Like, when an ADHD person, going back to that self-awareness exercises, when they find the thing that connects with their true motivations, they can hyper-focus. And if it's connected to your true motivations, you can extend that hyperfocus for weeks, months, years. And when an ADHD person finds that thing, you will become the best in the world at it. I truly believe that.
I love that you just said that, because I think so often, like I said at the start, we don't know what our strengths are. And if you're someone with ADHD, you've always been pointed out about your weaknesses. I was watching a movie the other day called Lost Ladies. There was a scene between two women, and one of the women had these drawings. And this other woman said, wow, this is so amazing. Did you draw this? And she said, yeah, I just did it. And she goes, where did you learn how to do this? And she said, I didn't learn, I just know how to do it. But it's so pointless. And she said, why do you think it's pointless? And she goes, because art is kind of just futile, isn't it? And she said, but you were just given this gift, right? And the woman said, yeah. And she said, so would you see this as a gift from God? And she said, yeah, I guess so. And she goes, so would you call something that God has given you pointless? And I think so often we can attach that to so many things, whether that's ADHD, whether that's having autism, whether that's having a particular skill that we just naturally have or we just get. We didn't try hard. We didn't sign up for it. We just have it. And I think so often we can look at ADHD as a gift from God, along with our other strengths that we have.
100%. Wow, that was amazing.
I'm going to ask you a personal question, so feel free to say you don't want to answer it. Have you ever taken medication for your ADHD before?
No, never prescribed ADHD medication. I drink coffee, which I now reflect on as probably self-medicating.
Right.
To some extent.
Right.
Not as powerful as the prescribed stimulant medication.
Right.
I have subconsciously throughout my life put systems in place to manage my ADHD. The main one for me is exercise.
Wow.
Like I will get up and move intentionally first thing. If I can, as often as I can, I go for a run. If I can't do that, I walk my dog every morning regardless. So that's one thing. Additionally, go for a run. If I don't have time or the weather's terrible, I just try and move. I star jumps, press ups, whatever it is in my flat. If I don't do my morning movement, the trajectory of my day in terms of focus, productivity is awful.
Wow.
Whereas if I get that movement in, every day is productive and so much better. These were just things I was doing subconsciously, and I just recognized through trial and error. And when I got my ADHD diagnosis and I was reading the benefits of movement to the ADHD mind, like I reflected, have I ever had a good idea sat at a desk? No. Have I ever had a good idea running or while walking my dog? Yes. UniLad, LabBible, ADHD Chatter. All of these things came to me whilst walking and running.
Same with my podcast. Came to me on a run, and the name came to idea came to me on a walk, and then the name came to me on a run.
It's why I advocate so much for movement in offices and in the workplace. Simple things like walking meetings, just moving around, walking desks, standing desks. So much better for productivity. So no, I've never taken prescribed medication for no other reason. There's no particular reason. I'm just quite happy with how my brain works.
Yes.
A combination, little things, and I'm not a nutritionist. I avoid carbohydrates. I find that if I have a heavy carb lunch, my focus in the afternoon disappears. So I protein for lunch. I tend to have carbs in the evening. It helps me sleep. But I'm by no means an expert in nutrition. That's my experience. But just generally, exercising, taking as many breaks as possible, rewarding myself, gamifying everything as often as I can, putting a song on and seeing if I can empty the dishwasher before it ends. Simple things, having task bracelets.
Yes.
My mind is so much better in the evening than it is in the morning. Like quite common, but for me the contrast is so extreme. I can be sat at my desk for hours in the evening, whereas in the morning very sluggish. So I take advantage of my nighttime brain and I really plan the next day, the night before, and I list 3 really important things that I need to do, and I write each one on a bracelet. And in the morning I put on the bracelets, and then as I complete each task I take off the bracelet and I put it in a bowl. And if I do all 3 tasks in the day, then I reward myself. I buy myself something off my Amazon wish list.
Oh.
And it's such a basic thing. The key thing that I've noticed with ADHD management, and this goes back to that task bracelet system, the big whiteboards I have in my flat, a lot of the stuff that I do to manage my life, I would have 5 years ago been too ashamed to tell anyone because they're childish. That's what I would have thought.
My whole bedroom has got whiteboards everywhere. My mum's like, when are you going to take these down?
I'm 36. I should be able to use the calendar on my iPhone.
Right.
But I've tried that.
Me too. It doesn't work for me.
Again, it goes back to that object permanence.
Yeah.
It goes into my iPhone. I put my phone down because I'm not looking at it. I forget the app exists and I forget the appointment. My phone goes, Alex, where are you? Oh my, I've forgotten. Whereas if I write it down on a big visual calendar, the object permanence doesn't happen because it is right in front of me. And I remember the appointment. I join that Zoom meeting on time. I do the tasks because I've got the bracelets on to remind. The bracelets are in my now. So they're not, the object permanence thing doesn't happen because they're in my now. Going back, I've removed all the shame in explaining the systems that I put in place in order to be productive. If it works for you, then it works for you. It doesn't matter how you get there.
I love that. I need to get those task bracelets, by the way. That's so great. You said something around how coffee is your self-medication. Talk to me a bit about that. Why did you say that? Because I gave up coffee in August and I went through a really horrible time for it.
I mean, coffee, good, bad, whatever your viewpoint is in it. For me, I find it massively beneficial. My focus, pre a cup of coffee is, say, 4 out of 10. Cup of coffee, significantly higher.
Right.
I can drink too much coffee sometimes. I almost get addicted to the focus that it gives me. So I have another one, but then I get anxious.
Yes.
And then I'm not productive at all because I'm just trying to starve off an anxiety attack. So I'm very aware of that now. My sort of limit is 3 to 4 over a day.
Okay.
But yeah, I find, caffeine for me, it gives me just amount of stimulation to maintain that focus.
So that's why I use caffeine to self-medicate. So I still have matcha. I could just have more matchas. Yeah. And what's your best piece of advice that you've received when it comes to managing your ADHD?
It really has to go back to the self-awareness piece. It's what moved the needle for me.
Mm-hmm.
The 150 people on my podcast I've spoken to, their life was chaotic. They were starting new hobbies every week, in and out of relationships every couple of years, new job, quitting it after 6 months because they were bored of it. The moment they all started doing these self-awareness exercises, that's when everything improved. They really recognized what was good for them and what was bad for them, what things they should be saying yes to, what things they should be saying no to. And as I've mentioned time and time again, when someone with ADHD has a true understanding of what they're interested in and what they're good at, what they're bad at, what they're genuinely passionate about, and then something comes along, new hobby, new partner, new job that aligns with that, then that's when you say yes to that thing. And when that happens, it's like all the stars aligned. All of the positives of ADHD then come alight. It's like all of the disorganization, all the procrastination, all of the disorganization, it just disappears because the motivation is constant. And all of the positives that I associate with ADHD come through: the creativity, the pattern recognition, the being great in a crisis, being intuitive, being a great judge of character, being able to zoom out and see the big picture and spot things that other people miss, the resilience, the creativity, the entrepreneurialism, all of these things are able to come to the surface.
Right.
Because you're not held back by the shame and the guilt of the procrastination because you've given up on another job or you've given up on another hobby, you've left another relationship. All of that stops because you finally found something that aligns with your true self and you're content and happy and motivated to stay at it. That's my biggest advice. Work on your self-awareness. Really dedicate as much time as possible to understanding yourself. Because when you do that as well, you finally realize that actually you don't need to be fixed. You don't need to hack your ADHD. You don't need to change who you are. Divert that attention to working on your self-awareness, understand who you are, and find something that aligns with that. Dedicate all of your energy into that, because that's when the magic happens.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. so much with me on this podcast that I can resonate with, that I can now go away and think about. And I'm really hoping for everyone listening that they got just as much value too. So thank you so much for spending your day with me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.